Hello, everyone. Welcome to the US Lunch and Learn, and welcome to USTV. Wanted to thank the people in the background for making this happen. Thank you, Rebecca, for running the show and being humble and anonymous. And my name is Rabbi Fine, and the community Rabbi in Stanmore. And we're going to engage quite a journey in Lunch and Learn today. Now, I guess the learning is my part. I can't tell you that I'll be partaking of the lunch element. I guess the people who are watching will be doing that. And the plan is the following. Often we relate to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in a kind of intuitive way. Many of us haven't necessarily studied the various topics in depth and various different aspects and elements, but we intuitively, especially as British Jewry, give a certain element of respect, early days, and we intuitively know what it's all about. This afternoon, the plan is to take some of that intuition and ground it in some text and hopefully really define what one of the key elements of our Rosh Hashanah is. And we'll do that. We're going to start with a personal experience, certainly a family experience, which I think provides context to the discussion that we are going to be setting off on today. And that is the following. My cousin Zvi was in the Tzanchanim, the paratroopers unit in the Israeli army. And the way it works is that paratroopers go through intense training. And then at some point, as they have graduated their course, the Israeli army invites the family members of the Tzanchanim, the recent graduates of the paratroopers unit, to watch their children engage in a public jump. In other words, they get the nachas of seeing their kid jumping out of a plane with a parachute attached to them. So Tzvi graduated and the army sent a letter or whatever communication it was to my Auntie Dina and Uncle Philip, Auntie Dina being from London, Uncle Philip originally from Manchester. They're Olim, they moved to Israel, they're seeing their son Tzvi, now in the army, paratroopers unit, he's jumping out of a plane. Not necessarily the plans they had for nachas, but you know what? Serving your country is also nachas, even if it means jumping out of planes. Now, they go to this gigantic field and they realize immediately there's a problem. The problem is that, of course, they don't all jump out together. They jump out one by one. And you also don't know who is your child. With child meaning 20-something-year-old. But you know, it's not like Steve jumps out of the plane with a massive parachute saying Sweet on it. You could be going away if you were jumping into enemy territory. Where you have your Ronnie and Steve and Fire, and it could be whichever enemies who are realize who's jumping. You don't want to do that, and that's what everything is ubiquitous, everything is the same. There are no distinguishing features, maybe some numbers and codes, but that's basically it. So if I was in Israel, my aunt and uncle were desperate to know who is this, what's the order? What number in the formation is 3? So if I was in Israel, they run over to the commander and they say, look, you're Alan Palestine, and we're from England, and etc. Please just tell us which number in the jump and the unit information is our son 3. And the commander is over Israel. Told them, it's military secret, you can't tell you, you're not allowed to tell you. And Mr. Philip decided to do what many people in Israel know to do, and that is you don't get your way first time, you just put the volume. So again, they approach the commander, whoever is leading this military jump, and they say to Sri, they say to the commander, we demand to know which one is our son to be. In a real rough kind of polite, but certainly assertive tone. The commander, bless him, says, you know what, I'm going to tell you. Your son Sri is the second, the person jumping second. Right, the person jumping second. So that's all the information they needed. They returned to their family, or they returned to the people jumping, so the viewing area, and they're watching their son Zvi jumping out of the plane. I'm sorry if we had some small microphone issues. I think we're back to normal now. Apologies. Anyway, so Auntie Dina and Uncle Philip are seeing their son Zvi jumping out of a plane. They know he's second. Now, I've never watched a public parachute jump before, but Auntie Dina and Uncle Philip described the scene to me. This is what they told me. They said the way it works is you look up at the plane and you see a very small dot emerge from a plane. That, of course, is the paratrooper jumping out. There's quite a distance immediately formed between the plane and the dot or the speck. Velocity is getting rapidly increasing. At that point, this cocoon-like shape emerges from the dot. That, of course, is a parachute. The velocity decreases, and slowly they make their way down to the ground, and everything seems to be fine. Great, brilliant. That's exactly what Auntie Dina and Uncle Philip saw when it came to jumper number 1. They were assured everything would be great. They're now looking, eyes peeled, Jewish nachas combined with tremendous trepidation for their son Zvi jumping second, as the commander told them. And they look up at the plane and they see that, as like the first point or the first person, a dot, a speck emerges from the plane. However, instead of the dot getting bigger and bigger as it comes down to Earth with a cocoon opening, unfortunately, this dot was getting smaller and smaller as it defied gravity and went not down towards the ground, but up away from the plane. Auntie and Uncle Philip rush over to the commander, say, "What's happened? What have you done to our son Zvi? He's defying the laws of gravity." At that point, the commander let off a wry smile and said, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry," in Hebrew. He says, "I forgot to tell you that after each person who jumps, after each one of my soldiers, we release a balloon." And therefore, Auntie Dina and Uncle Philip, bless them, are looking at what they thought was their son Zvi, was actually just a balloon. Of course, Zvi then did jump afterwards and everything was fine. A memorable day, in Zvi's life, and certainly now memorable in Auntie Dina and Uncle Philip's life. Why am I telling you this story? Because sometimes our first vision, or if you like, our first encounters with something or someone or a situation are not necessarily 100% accurate, and sometimes can be misleading. So what I'd like to do today in the time we have together is we're going to learn a piece of Rambam, which is going to come up on screen in a second. We are going to be learning what the Rambam has to say about Rosh Hashanah. Now, some of this is serious, as you'd expect. In fact, it's all serious, but some of this is particularly strict, as we would say. It's very to the point, as you'd expect when it comes to the Day of Judgment. But what we're going to do is we're going to try and unravel or fathom or relate to some of this ourselves by asking one or two very searching questions, and hopefully travel the journey from Rambam and end up with a particularly interesting museum and what Rosh Hashanah is all about. So if we could just get the Rambam on the screen, thank you so much. The background, appreciate it. And the Rambam starts off as follows. You can follow in the Hebrew or English, and in the read it from the company. So the Rambam says as follows. He says, every single person, yes, there's a serious bonus. Has merits. Every single person has merits, and has the full bonus merits and sins. Things that are kind of things not kind of things that are funny stuff to do, things that are funny stuff not to do. And he says, he continues as follows. Mishas Kurosa, the Sayers of a no-self, Sabbath. Someone whose someone whose mitzvahs are greater than their sins, they are called a tzaddik. As you'd expect, they're called a tzaddik. Misha avanosav yiseres al zchiosav, Rasha. Someone whose sins are greater than their mitzvahs, they are called a Rasha. They're called evil. Now, we'll talk about not judging and where they came from, etc. We're going to get into that discussion, and we're going to talk about how you measure these things as well. But nevertheless, they are deemed, says the Rambam, a Rasha, which we'll discuss fully later. Mechza lemechza, if it's someone who's 50-50, Beinoni, they are considered to be a middle-of-the-road kind of person. In the middle, they haven't defined themselves either way. Interestingly, the Rambam follows this up and says, V'chena Medina, so too when it comes to the entire country. If they are top heavy mitzvahs wise, then the entire country is deemed to be righteous. If it's top heavy in terms of sins, then they're deemed wicked. And the entire world as well. Now, what if you've got concentric circles that within a country you've got one person who's righteous, etc.? That the commentaries deal with. Of course, one example seems to be Noach, but that is another discussion. Continues the Rambam. What difference? What difference if you get branded righteous, wicked, middle? There has to be some form of practical difference. Who cares how you're branded? What difference does it make? Says the Rambam in Halacha base. Adam sha'avonosav merubim. A person who has greater sins als chayosav than their mitzvahs. Listen to this statement. This is what we're going to discuss for the next 10, 15 minutes. Miyad hu meis berisho. Immediately they perish in their wickedness. Meis, it means pass away. Pass away from this world. Shenemar, the Rambam quotes a pasuk, al rov avonecha. Medina similarly, if an entire country gets top-heavy sin-wise, then miyat hiovedes, again, perishes immediately. Shenema zaka stone va'anoah, the episode of Sodom and Gomorrah, which of course they were perished, they were destroyed. The entire world, in the world got to a state, or stage, where they are top-heavy collectively. Sin-wise, they would be destroyed. You can repeat it. You have immediately the because Hashem saw at the time of the flood that the land was evil, and that would destroy the entire world. Now, if you think about it, there should be a question which needs to be asked. The Rambam is saying that someone who's having a say in the river, someone who has top heavy when it comes to sins, they'll perish, they'll demise unfortunately immediately. Is that, I know we can't really ask this against the Rambam in such a blandness. Is that true? Is that true? Is it anyone who's top heavy when it comes to a virus? They'll perish? Aren't there? The Ravid asked the question really. The Ravid is the prime commentary on the Rambam over here. Or at least asked questions on the Rambam. And the Ravid says, low cultural solo. It's not just he says. He says that definitely that Kiyesha Shaim Chaim. There are people who are wicked who are alive. There are people who are wicked who are alive, who are living. What does the Rambam mean when he says that a wicked person will die immediately? That is the question of the Ravid. That is a good springboard to be able to discuss what exactly this statement means. Now, I understand the microphone we've got a bit jittery microphone. I'm not sure exactly why. So just for those, if anyone was tuned out, let me just explain where we're up to. A quick summary. Apologies. The Rambam had made a bold statement. Of course, he's got sources, but we have to explain. The Rambam has said that a person or a nation or a country, a world even, who is top-heavy sin-wise, will die immediately. Not talking about Rosh Hashanah yet, by the way. Just die immediately. And the Ravid asks on the Rambam, he says, what are you talking about? They're wicked people who are living. That means everyone in the world is righteous. They're wicked people who are alive. There have been wicked people throughout history, unfortunately. They didn't perish straight away. So how are we to understand this statement of the Rambam? We're going to discuss that. There are a couple of further commentaries, who lived a little bit later, that we shall discuss. The first we'll discuss is called the Legend Mishna. Legend Mishna, you might know, is a phrase used. It means the challahs on the Shabbos table. The reason why this commentary is called the Legend Mishna is because the Rambam wrote his book called the Mishnah Torah, which is the repetition or the summary, as he would have it, of the entire oral law, and therefore the commentary was called the Legend
Mishna. Either way, okay, it's not the Rambam's commentary. It's a different rabbi. I've actually forgot the name and era. But the Legend Mishna would like to answer as follows. He says, look, the Rambam is not talking about death in this world. The Rambam is referring to spiritual death. In other words, we know there's going to be a reckoning after 120, where one gets upstairs, so to speak, and Hashem in the heavenly court sifts through our mitzvahs, our aveiros, good things, bad things. There's going to be a test. Thank God it's not going to be run by any algorithms. Thank God it's not going to be preset in that respect. And Hashem is going to run it himself, so you don't have to worry about various different appeals. But nevertheless, we refer to this on Rosh Hashanah and throughout Jewish literature, that there is a reckoning after one passes away from this world. In fact, this world is merely a preparation for that world. Says the Legend Mishna, the Rambam never meant perishing in this world. He meant perishing in the next world. And therefore you have people who are alive and well, even though they may be wicked. Right? That is the Legend Mishna's answer. Now, of course, those who are thinking one step ahead may be wanting to ask, although I don't think on StreamYard there's a facility to ask, but you'll ask, look, how does that make sense? Or what, well, put, I guess, more pointedly, but the Rambam doesn't seem to be talking about the next world. The Rambam seems to be talking about this world because the verses, the proofs, the text that he brings as proofs for his point are Sodom and Amorah, who were destroyed physically, and the generation of the flood that were also destroyed physically. Now, there happen to be other sources about what happened to these people spiritually, but the Rambam isn't quoting those. The Rambam seems to be, therefore, not talking about judgment in the next world, but what is happening to a person in this world. And therefore answers the Kesef Mishnah, Rav Yosef Cairo, also author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. The Kesef Mishnah, a different commentary on the Rambam, answers something which is fascinating. The Kesef Mishnah answers that based on the next part of the Rambam, really. If we continue reading with our Rambam, the Rambam writes or says as follows, just fascinating. He says, Shikol zeh. How do you work out if someone has many more mitzvahs than sins? How does it work? How do you do this calculation? It can't be numerical. It can't just be a question of, one mitzvah, one sin, we're collecting gold tokens, silver tokens, etc. It can't be that kind of thing. Says the Rambam, and this is, I think, the last point that we're going to need to switch to, and that is the following. He says, Shikos at this calculation, 80 million has bonus. It doesn't take into account numbers per se. It's qualitative. There are some mitzvahs that will, do away with. They will outweigh various different sins and vice versa as well. If you wanted to put it into a free will context, the way Rav Dessler talks about it in terms of his free will ladder is that there are various things that are beneath us and various things that are beyond us. You won't get punished for things which are beyond us. In other words, if you're not, praying 20 hours a day, obviously you're not going to get punished, and that's not going to be held against you because you're not on that level. Similarly, you're not going to be rewarded for things that are beneath you. If you walk past someone in the street and you decide that you're not going to mug them, God forbid, you're not going to get rewarded for that because there was never a test there in the first place. It says with Dessler, it's all about where your test is and who you are, and moving up one level at a time on your free will ladder. And therefore, in other words, Hashem takes into account where you started from. You will have people who started high on the free will ladder, and you will have people, depending on their background, who started low on the free will ladder. And for them, certain things that for you may not be a test, for them may be a test, and they will receive more reward for their mitzvahs than things that we may be receiving reward for. An example, a simple example. Let's say you have two people. One of them is the child of a serial killer, and the other one is the child, of a philanthropist. The child of the serial killer, their parent, let's say, unfortunately murdered someone once a month or once a week. And this child decides, or this person decides, they grow up, I don't want to be like my parents. I don't want to murder someone once a month.
Instead, I am going to steal from someone once a month. Now, that's fantastic. I mean, it's very sad that they're stealing. That's fantastic in terms of they've moved up the ladder. They had a great temptation to kill. Instead, they're stealing. So it's certainly better than killing someone. Again, not that we're recommending that they're stealing, but they've moved their ladder. They've moved their flag up the ladder. Someone who is, let's say, the child, I don't know, a philanthropist, used to giving a lot of money to charity, who decides they don't want to give anymore. You know, they want to just hoard their money. They don't want to be generous at all. They have moved down, I guess, the career ladder. Now, they may still be further up than the child of the serial killer, but in terms of progress, the child of the serial killer has made progress. In the Malbim's words, we might call that child, even though they're stealing, a tzaddik, because they've moved their flag. So who you want next to you as a next door neighbor, that you can make your own choice.
But in terms of who's made progress, there's no doubt Jewishly that the child of a serial killer, they've moved their flag much more. And therefore, this calculation emphasizes the Kesef Mishna, mitzvahs, averos, etc., is not quantitative, it's qualitative. And therefore, says the Legend Mishna, and I think we can do away with a source sheet if that's okay. Therefore, says the Legend Mishna, thank you, that the Rambam's totally right. We're talking about this world. Everyone who's alive in this world is not wicked, because the Rambam says the Kesef Mishna needs to be understood literally. If they were wicked, they would perish immediately. We just have to know their background. Maybe they've done certain mitzvahs they've really worked for, they've really achieved based on their background, something they've really pushed themselves to do. That might outweigh many, many different sins. Now, I would add just one thing. There may be certain people in history, this the Rambam says elsewhere, that even though they're wicked, Hashem keeps them around to do certain things, to push history towards a course that Hashem needs it to reach. That would be an exception to this. But nevertheless, the Rambam seems to say that someone who's wicked perishes immediately. Fascinating statement. I guess makes us look at people different. Or differently. There's one additional point. That is, in the next couple of halachas, the Rambam says one more thing. We don't need to get the source sheet up for this again, but the Rambam does say something really interesting as well, which is a good second stage to this whole discussion. The Rambam writes something that we know, which is on the day of Rosh Hashanah, there are three books that are open. You've got the book for the righteous, you've got the book for the wicked, and you've got the book for the people who are in between. And the Rambam continues that a person who is wicked will be judged for bad things. A person who is good, righteous, will be judged for good things. That needs defining as well. And then someone who's in the middle will wait until Yom Kippur, and then they'll join one of the other two books. The question we need to ask, though, according to the Kesef Mishna, is the following. The Rambam has said that if someone who God forbid is wicked, they're supposed to perish immediately. It's the flood, it's the menorah. So how are there three books on Rosh Hashanah? If a person is supposed to perish immediately, how can there be a book for the wicked on Rosh Hashanah? They're supposed to have perished immediately. How did they make it to Rosh Hashanah? And you can't say, well, this perishing immediately is decided on Rosh Hashanah, because that's not what the Rambam was saying. And the flood wasn't on Rosh Hashanah, and I don't think was necessarily decided on Rosh Hashanah. How does it work? How do wicked people make it to Rosh Hashanah such that there can be a reevaluation in the book of the righteous, in the book of the wicked? How does that all work? It can't be that we're talking about people who just happened on Rosh Hashanah to be top-heavy sin-wise, but before that they were not. It doesn't sound like that's the big verdict of Rosh Hashanah either. So I'd like to head towards a close by quoting a beautiful idea of Rabbi Shlomo Wolber, who, just to give some context and history, if it's helpful, he was originally from Berlin. He was from a secular family. He attended Berlin University. After graduation, he became interested in religious Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, and he decided to study in yeshiva. He eventually joined the Mir Yeshiva. When they fled to Poland early in World War II, Revolver couldn't escape with them. He was a German national, and therefore, even though they made the journey from Poland and eventually ended up in Japan, Revolver fled to Sweden, where he was actually instrumental in various elements of the war efforts in terms of saving refugees. He actually married quite a few refugees off to each other. Then he moved to Israel and became a mashgiach in Mir Yeshiva, Ber Yaakov Yeshiva. His shiurim legendary, to be honest. And when he passed away, I think it was 2005, or 2000, there were over 30,000 people at his levaya. He's got a book which he wrote, although he wrote it anonymously. They caught him writing it. Anyway, Revolver wants to say like this, amazing idea. He says, Rosh Hashanah is not about what you did in your past year. He's got a source from a certain Gemara, which he understood this way, based on a quoting the Yerushalmi, but that we don't have time for. His Rosh Hashanah is not the last day of the previous year. On Rosh Hashanah, we're not judged for what we did last year, no less than we're not judged for what we are going to do in the future. Hashem judges us, ba'asher hu sham. On Rosh Hashanah, we're judged based on exactly where we are on Rosh Hashanah itself. That means the judgment of Rosh Hashanah is not about baggage. There'll be a judgment one day about what one did in the past and all the mitzvahs and averos as we've been describing. But Rosh Hashanah is about how you act, how your mental attitude is expressed on the day of Rosh Hashanah itself. It's fascinating. That means that you can be someone who was a middle person or a tzaddik even throughout the year, but on Rosh Hashanah, if they don't step up, then unfortunately they can be in a different book to which they would have liked to be. But that also conversely means that if you're on a certain level throughout the year, Rosh Hashanah is that day that you can take advantage of and say, you know what, I'm putting all my past baggage aside. Rosh Hashanah is not about the previous year. As we said, it's not the last day of the previous year. It's the first day of the current year. When we say it's a day to make a new start, it's not just hyperbole. It's not just expression. It's not just a way of saying it. It's a day to make a new start because the judgment is about what you're doing on that day. The way Revolver says it so beautifully and eloquently is that when the Mishnah says on Rosh Hashanah, we go before Hashem like sheep. In other words, individually we pass before Hashem like a shepherd checking the sheep. He says, that's not the method of judgment. That's not what happens in order to facilitate judgment. That is the judgment itself. Can you stand before Hashem on Rosh Hashanah? Can you change your attitude? Of course, your preparations will be key. You can't just turn up having not prepared, or put more positively, the greater you prepare, then the greater impression you can make on Rosh Hashanah itself, so to speak. But it's about Rosh Hashanah. I think it's so important where certainly many of us are constantly walking around with, could be concerns, worries, baggage, and it needs to. We can't just ignore such things. But sometimes we think to ourselves, I can never sever myself from my past regrets, or I can never sever myself from things that I just wish I hadn't done. That is an indistinguishable part of who I am currently. And Rosh Hashanah says it's not true. Rosh Hashanah says get rid of what you had in the past. Rosh Hashanah says even without officially declaring what you've done in the past. Of course, we don't mention sin. That's only Yom Kippur. You can almost redesign yourself based on your attitude to Rosh Hashanah. If we can just finish with a slight anecdote about the preparations. Very interesting. We have various different anecdotes about how great people prepared for Yamim Noraim. I think it was said of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta that before Rosh Hashanah, he would head up to the shul. I think he would head up to the ladies' gallery. He was found taking out the nails that were protruding from seats in the shul. He said, everyone's going to come on Rosh Hashanah, and we don't want anyone to get injured or anyone's clothes to rip. My preparation for Rosh Hashanah is taking the nails. Very interesting how he related to the preparation for Rosh Hashanah, and that small actions can have great impact. But I want to finish with a story about the Klausenburger Rebbe. The Klausenburger Rebbe, many will know, lived through the war. His family perished. And after the war, he was sat there in a DP camp. And this was the first time that he was free after years of torture, years of travails and endeavors. And he was sitting there in a DP camp. He was preparing for the Yamim Noraim. I think the story is said about Erev Yom Kippur. Now he's sitting there and he's deep in thought. What can I change? What can I do? How am I going to relate to the day? And at that point, a 6-year-old child knocks on the door. walks in, probably didn't have his own office, to be honest, in a DP camp. The Klausenburger Rebbe turns around and says, yes, how can I help you, my child? And the child says, look, the custom before Rosh Hashanah or before Yom Kippur is that parents bless their children. He says, I'm not sure where my parents are. He says, I'm not sure they survived. Are you able to bless me? And the Klausenburger Rebbe stopped what he did. He stood up and he gave the child a very warm blessing. As you can imagine, it didn't stop there. 2 minutes later, there was another proverbial knock at the Klausenburger Rebbe's door. And lo and behold, another child comes in. Again, same story. No parents. Can you bless me? Again, Klausenburger Rebbe stops with his preparations for Yom Kippur, blesses the kid. All in all, 87 different children were blessed by the Klausenburger Rebbe that day. That was his preparation for Yom Kippur. What I mean to say is that, yes, Rosh Hashanah is about how we relate to it on the day. And we have to prepare. We can't just run in and say, Rosh Hashanah, I'm here, I declare myself. There has to be a certain amount of preparation. But that preparation can incorporate learning the prayers. That preparation can incorporate trying to tap into what the day is all about. But that preparation can and should incorporate generally taking an assessment of being a better person. What can I do for someone else? That is part of growth. That is part of being a great person. It's that greatness that we'd like to achieve on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that we're judged on, Ba'asher Husham, where we are in our current moment, where we are in terms of how we relate to the day, as we try and express the true people we can be, people we'd like to be, with none of that negative baggage, only positive things as we head towards Rosh Hashanah. I want to wish you a good year, a healthy year, a peaceful year, and only good health. Mir Hashem, please God for everyone. Shana Tova.